Bob Herbert's op-ed.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to op-ed.tv. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy were among the most storied figures in the history of America. And yet, surprisingly little has been known about the way these two men related to and interacted with one another. That is, until now. A new book, The Promise and the Dream, the untold story of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, fills in the historical blanks and does it in a most compelling way. I'm fortunate to have as my guest the author, David Margolick. David, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Bob.
Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
You know, it's really strange reading a book like this because you think you know so much about these two great figures in American history, and yet there's so much that you don't know. And an essential aspect of the book is that the fact that these two men at the same time and close to one another in age really interacted very little, and yet, as you point out, their interests and even their passions really overlap. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, they were integrally related to one another because one was the most important white man in the on the question of civil rights. Right. As Attorney General for 3 years, he really had more to do with determining the course of the civil rights movement than anybody in the Kennedy administration, apart from his brother, and maybe even more than he. And Martin Luther King was the most important civil rights leader. And so it's very clear that these two guys had a relationship. It was largely a subterranean relationship, and that was no accident. I mean, the Kennedys kept their distance from Martin Luther King, but they had to deal with him. And in many ways, I mean, Martin Luther King was responsible for John Kennedy's election. So these two guys were very interdependent, but they had a complicated and hidden relationship. It was an evolving relationship over the 8 years that they sort of fenced with one another. There were several direct encounters, but they were rarely within camera range. There are really no good pictures of just the two of them together. And again, I would submit, and I write in the book, that this was no accident, that the Kennedys were politicians more than anything else, and they realized that while Martin Luther King would play a large part in determining the success of the Kennedy administration, they couldn't embrace him too directly. The Kennedys, were running for re-election from the moment that they were elected. Right. And the South was still in play, and they just didn't want to be seen with Martin Luther King.
You had all those Democratic members of Congress and other Democratic figures in the South who essentially were playing the role that Republican officials in the South now play. They were, in those days, segregationists, hostile to civil rights and that sort of thing, but crucial to any Democrat running for president.
Well, that's right, and you have to remind yourself of that Georgia was in play. I mean, which is amazing that, now it's back in play in a way. I mean, now the circle, it's come full circle, right. Or almost full circle.
Almost full circle.
Almost full
which
circle.
Is astounding. You mentioned that King was responsible to some extent for Jack actually getting elected, because that election in 1960 was a really razor-thin margin.
Right.
Talk about the role that King played.
Well, what happened was that King was was thrown into prison on a sort of a trumped-up parole violation on the eve of the election. And the Kennedys debated whether to do something about this, and John Kennedy ended up calling up Coretta King and commiserating with her and offering to try to help in some way. If there's anything that I can do, let me know. Coretta King was pregnant at the time, and Martin Luther King had been sent to this prison in rural Georgia, and there were really fears for his safety. And John Kennedy called her up over the opposition of Robert Kennedy. This is Robert Kennedy.
Robert didn't want him to call.
Robert Kennedy, ever the pragmatist, thought this imperiled his brother's candidacy and would backfire. But it turned out that word got out about Kennedy's intervention. Robert Kennedy flipped himself. This is interesting, not uncharacteristic. He was a complicated guy and ended up calling up the judge who was overseeing the case and got King sprung from jail. This was within days of the 1960 vote. And word spread deliberately through the black churches throughout congregations, primarily in the north of what the Kennedys had done. And the black vote came out overwhelmingly for Kennedy on Election Day and swung several key states.
After Jack was elected president and Bobby was attorney general, there was one crucial point of interaction between Bobby Kennedy and King, and that was when King and some of the Freedom Riders and other followers of King were trapped in a church. And talk about what happened. It was a harrowing situation.
Well, let me just back up 1 second to say that when Robert Kennedy was named Attorney General, it was a very controversial move by John Kennedy to name his brother, right, considered nepotistic, obviously. And Martin Luther King was horrified, not over the issue of nepotism, but because Robert Kennedy was a hard ass, and Robert Kennedy was considered a right-winger. Robert Kennedy had been associated with Joe McCarthy. And King thought that this was a poor steward for the civil rights movement, and cried out to his aides, including Harry Belafonte. It's a story that Belafonte has told in his own book. Find me this man's moral center because we got to deal with him.
Right.
You know, I keep hearing all these awful things about him. I know his record is very bad, but we have to work with him. So this was the backdrop to the episode that you're talking about, where King was in this church in Montgomery, and the church was besieged by protesters, and he was talking to Robert Kennedy over the phone, and in that conversation, you can see all of the complexities of their relationship. You can see the awkwardness, you can see the interdependence, you can see King sort of fencing with Robert Kennedy. You can see Robert Kennedy patronizing King.
And King was in fear of his life.
King was in fear of his
violent
King was in
protesters
fear
outside
of his life. There were all of these protesters outside, and Robert Kennedy is sort of making light of it and sort of lame attempts at humor. And it's one of the rare recorded interactions between the two of them where you can see the full kind of complexity of their relationship. Alternately friendly, alternately wary, very careful, awkward. All of the different cross currents between them are visible in that conversation.
And how did that crisis resolve itself? I mean, obviously, King got out safely, but how did that happen?
Well, Kennedy sent in National Guardsmen and security people to sort of ring the church. I mean, he didn't send in troops.
Right.
I mean, he sent in, it wasn't National Guardsmen, actually. It was sort of this awkwardly assembled group of security people from different agencies, and they ultimately made the situation, they neutralized the situation, and King sort of got smuggled out of the church in the middle of the night.
You wrote that by any historical measure, King was the more significant of the two men. I agree with that. I'm not sure whether the public in general would agree with that. I mean, I just don't know one way or another. But tell me why you feel
Well,
that
I
way.
think that King, single-handedly advanced the agenda of civil rights in this country and changed the whole culture, the whole black-white culture in this country, really. King was a revolutionary figure. There had never been anyone like him before. King had, in a way, met his potential. King arguably had peaked by the time he was killed, had peaked before he was killed,
Right.
Was taking it from all directions in the civil rights movement, had opposition among more conservative civil rights leaders who felt that he had stepped out of his lane by going up against the Vietnam War and antagonizing Lyndon Johnson, who was considered the best friend that the civil rights movement could have had in the White House, and at the same time more radical figures, Stokely Carmichael and Rap Brown, were yapping at him from the other side. And King was in a very troubled, agonizing position late in his life. He was depressed. He felt, he felt that his influence was waning, and it wasn't clear exactly where he was going to go in the civil rights movement. Whereas Robert Kennedy was all potential. Robert Kennedy was unrealized potential. Robert Kennedy might have grown to be as important a historical figure as Martin Luther King already was, but we'll never know.
Well, you mentioned Vietnam, and this was like such a tough issue for the country as a whole at the time. King had taken on Vietnam, but it was also a problem for Bobby Kennedy. So can you talk a little bit about the role that Vietnam played in the last years of both of these men's lives?
Well, Martin Luther King felt that the civil rights movement could not be separated from the Vietnam War.
And that's what caused him problems with the old guard.
That's what caused him problems with the old
civil rights
guard.
movement.
People felt that he had no business antagonizing Lyndon Johnson, who was really their friend.
Johnson by that time had passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
That's right. And Johnson felt betrayed by Martin Luther King. And people felt that King had no business doing something like that. More conservative figures in the civil rights movement and even in the liberal community. I mean, I remember feeling that as a 16-year-old kid, that King was sort of acting inappropriately, and this wasn't his brief to do this.
Well, he gave a famous speech against the war in 1967, and the New York Times wrote a blistering editorial criticizing him for it.
Yeah, this is the famous speech that he gave at Riverside Church, and it was a very controversial speech, and King became radioactive, really, to Robert Kennedy, among other people. Robert Kennedy also, of course, had an ambiguous relationship he was much more careful about his opposition to the Vietnam War than King had been, because Robert Kennedy was one of the architects of the Vietnam War. He'd been present at the creation present at the acceleration of American involvement. He'd been behind his brother on that. I mean, the Kennedys were sort of believers in the Vietnam enterprise at the beginning, and Robert Kennedy was a supporter of the Green Berets and counterinsurgency and all of that. So Robert Kennedy kind of tiptoed into opposition to the Vietnam War. He was very deliberate about it and tentative about it, which is what opened up the possibility for Gene McCarthy to come in as the anti-war candidate rather than Robert Kennedy. So this was an issue that divided King and Kennedy was much more careful about it, and I think it maintained the distance between the two. It limited the degree to which Kennedy could embrace Martin Luther King later on when he was running for president. King's speech at Riverside Church was not only against the Vietnam War, it was sort of against America's role in the world and even the capitalist system. I mean, King had become a much more radical figure by then, and Kennedy could never have embraced him. It would have been political suicide. So again, their relationship was below the surface. It was rarely explicit.
So things moved so fast. so he gives the speech in 67. By 68, things are moving so fast. It's hard for me. I was a young man at the time. It's hard for me to convey what it was actually like to people now, because you had the Vietnam war going terribly in January of that year. You had the Tet Offensive, and everybody began to understand that there's no like big celebratory win that's going to happen here. Gene McCarthy challenges Johnson and does well in the New Hampshire primary. He didn't actually win it, but he came in second, a strong second. Johnson gets out of then Bobby Kennedy gets into the race as an anti-war candidate, stepping on Gene McCarthy's victory. But then Johnson decides that he's not going to run for president. And you had a very interesting thing, one of many very interesting things in the book. When Martin Luther King was killed in April of 1968. You quote Jack Newfield, the old New York reporter, as saying that King's assassination gave Kennedy a sense of purpose that had been lost when Johnson withdrew from the race. So give us a little picture of what was going on in this fraught portion of 1968. Johnson gets out. Kennedy is now an anti-war candidate against Johnson, trying to get the Democratic nomination, but then King gets killed, and Newfield is saying it gives Kennedy renewed purpose. Give us a sense of what that was all about.
I think that Robert Kennedy got into the race to oppose Lyndon Johnson. And all of a sudden, the reason for his candidacy had been ripped out from under him. I mean, Johnson had disappeared. And it looked as if the anti-war position was more likely to prevail in a way. They'd gotten Johnson, the architect, really, of the Vietnam acceleration. They'd gotten him out of the race. And Kennedy sort of was floundering briefly. This had been the purpose of his getting into the race to begin with. And he wasn't quite sure where to go. And I think that what Jack was referring to was that Kennedy had to find his own voice. He didn't have a boogeyman anymore to run against. I mean, Kennedy's evolution in all of this is really interesting, because if you go back to Kennedy's beginnings, Kennedy admitted that he had absolutely no empathy for black people. Right. I mean, in fact, he was almost proud of it. I mean, there's an interview that he gave to Anthony Lewis of the Times for the Kennedy Library after John Kennedy's assassination, where Lewis says to him, when did you first become conscious of civil rights as a problem in this country? And Kennedy said, I was never conscious of it. In my family, we didn't talk about racial distinctions, black, white. There were people with problems everywhere. And Kennedy resisted the idea of being a liberal generally and a liberal on racial matters.
And that has so much of the ring of truth, because both Jack and Bobby, I mean, you read the histories, there's no real issue related to black people.
No.
And their politics were, John Kennedy was interested primarily in foreign policy.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, this is the reason why, among other reasons, why Martin Luther King Sr., Daddy King, was supporting Nixon until the Kennedys got his son out of jail.
Right.
I mean, there was still the Jackie Robinson wing of the Republican Party.
Right.
And there was the feeling that the Kennedys had no particular empathy for black people. And Robert Kennedy even sort of embraced this sort of indifference. One of the problems in writing about Robert Kennedy was that he threw out a lot of disinformation about himself. He wanted to come across as the tough guy, who wasn't the squishy, typical liberal.
Right.
And so he sort of made himself more of a harder ass than he really was.
Didn't want to show any of the soft spots, any of
Right.
the empathy that he seemed to really feel
Yeah.
as you got towards the end of his life.
Now this changed in the course of his brother's administration. There's the famous meeting that he had with James Baldwin
Right.
and other black intellectuals in June of 1963. Kennedy was very curious. He was more curious than his brother. He reached out to the black community because he wanted to learn about it more than his brother. He was more flexible in a way than his brother. He was more educable in a way than his brother, and he was more passionate. He was more visceral. I mean, really, it was he who was arguably, more than any other Kennedy advisor, who was behind John Kennedy introducing civil rights legislation in June of 1963. So Kennedy had evolved even before John Kennedy was assassinated, but that really, obviously, that changed him very, very profoundly.
Right.
So that after Lyndon Johnson, I think Robert Kennedy found a friend in the black community. Robert Kennedy was a man who needed to be loved, and between 1964 and 1967, he realized that the great affection, maybe in part undeserved affection, that black America had for John Kennedy had washed over him
Right.
and embraced him. And he embraced it in return, so that after Lyndon Johnson withdrew, it wasn't that much of a leap for Robert Kennedy to base his campaign on the rights and concerns of minorities, of farm workers, of Latinos, of Cesar Chavez, and of the black community. So by the time Martin Luther King was shot in March of 1968, Robert Kennedy had really adopted King's role. He became almost instantly, even even among Martin Luther King's advisors,
Right.
Robert Kennedy was seen as the successor to Martin Luther King in really an extraordinary way.
Maybe the most powerful manifestation of that you cover in your book. It's a story that's been told many times, but I thought that you covered it and actually put new information into this story. And this is the address that Bobby Kennedy made from the back of a flatbed truck in Indianapolis after he found out that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. So we've got about 3 minutes left. I'd like you to talk about that address, and then we'll talk about the assassination of Bobby Kennedy.
Well, that was really Robert Kennedy's most famous speech. And it's ironic in a way. Robert Kennedy, like the Kennedys, always had great speechwriters. He had Richard Goodwin, and he had Jeff Greenfield, and he had Adam Walensky, all of these people drafting very eloquent speeches, the speech in South Africa, other famous speeches that he gave. But his most famous speech is one that he crafted almost instantaneously in the back seat of a car driving him into the black neighborhood of Indianapolis the night that King was shot. It was a campaign appearance that many people had urged him not to make. They thought that the neighborhood was unsafe. It was dangerous for him to go there. The mayor of Indianapolis, Richard Lugar, later the senator from Indiana, had urged that the event be canceled. The more people told Robert Kennedy not to do it, even Ethel Kennedy went back to the hotel. I describe in the book how she's clutching her rosary beads in the back seat.
And as you point out, she was usually
very stalwart,
yeah.
in being by his side, and even she had vibrations about that night and went back to the hotel. The more you told Robert Kennedy not to do something, the more likely he was to do it. And he got up and he told the crowd that King had been shot. There were many people in the crowd, particularly the people who had shown up early, and there weren't, transistor radios around, still didn't know that King had been shot. Robert Kennedy gave a very conciliatory, short speech that night, urging racial harmony, pleading for peace and pleading for nonviolence, urging that the crowd and his listeners follow King's pleas for nonviolence and honor him in that important kind of way, tried to calm the situation down. And famously, Indianapolis was one of the few American cities that didn't go up in flames.
Did not erupt that night.
Did not erupt that night. And it was the speech. I knew that it was again coming from the man that King had originally opposed as Attorney General, coming from the man, it's something we haven't talked about, who approved wiretaps on Martin Luther King's phone. For Kennedy to give that speech that night showed how extraordinarily he had evolved. It was more famous, really, than any speech that was given at King's funeral. It really became the eulogy for Martin Luther King. And as I say, Robert Kennedy's most famous speech. And yet the next morning, the campaign was suspended after that, but Robert Kennedy gave a speech the next morning in Cleveland before the campaign, all the campaigns were suspended, a speech about America, about violence in America, quite a forward-looking and extraordinary speech, and didn't mention Martin Luther King by name, which I thought was just amazing. How do you speak about violence the night after King is killed without mentioning him? And to me, that reflected again that Kennedy had to keep his distance. Even the day after King was shot, he didn't mention King in a speech that had King's fate all over it. And it just showed that it encapsulated in a way that even in death, the relationship between these two men remained awkward.
That was in April. Bobby Kennedy, of course, was killed in June of 1968. I guess we're going to have to stop there. I wish we could talk for another hour. David Margolick, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. We recently received the sad news that the Harvard sociologist Diva Pager had died from pancreatic cancer at the young age of 46. Dr. Pager was not famous in the celebrity sense of that word, but she was very well known in her field for landmark research that showed that racial discrimination in the labor market and the criminal justice system was even worse than many scholars and civil rights activists had realized. In her doctoral dissertation at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, she explained, after painstaking research, that American employers were more likely to hire a white man with a felony conviction than a black man equally qualified who had no criminal record at all. Her Harvard colleague, William Julius Wilson, one of the nation's foremost experts on racial discrimination in the labor market, said, "I am a scholar of race relations, and prior to Diva's research, I would not have predicted this finding." Her study showed that blacks with a criminal record had desperate trouble securing employment. When former President George W. Bush and many others pushed efforts to help former prisoners re-enter the job market, they relied heavily on Dr. Pager's research and recommendations. The New York Times, in its obituary, said her work was so well regarded that she had been on track to be elected to the prestigious National Academy of Sciences, a rare achievement in any case, but even rarer for someone in sociology, for a woman, and for one so young. Upon her death, her name was removed from the ballot because membership cannot be given posthumously. That's all for now. See you next time.